Hello everyone, I am Bianca Therese R. Alvarado, and for today's video I am going to answer about CSR in past, present, and future. As we contemplate what the new normal means for individuals, governments, and societies, it seems a timely moment to reflect on the role and scope of corporate social responsibility or CSR. In the wake of COVID-19, we look back at the evolutions of CSR and ask what it could mean in a post-pandemic world. Corporate social responsibility, known as CSR, was the private sector's response to a debate about the scope of business responsibility for the social and environmental consequences of commerce. It was the 20th century incarnation of an age-old concept that business is often moved to give something back to their workers and communities who dedicated lifetimes of hard graft through private forms of wealth redistribution. One famous 19th century philanthropist was the entrepreneur Andrew Carnegie, who donated Carnegie Hall to the city of New York. The formal practice of CSR emerged in the 1960s against the backdrop of a rapid globalization and industrialization of trade and commerce, particularly as companies' practices and activities were moved offshore and away from the public eye and become harder to scrutinize. In the 1990s, the public watched as Nike's reputation and stock price plummeted in the wake of the exposures of its unethical labor practices in sweatshops in Asia. Others relied to avoid similar damage by implementing CSR strategies and teams. In-house experts dedicated themselves to managing brands' reputation and any negative press brought about from public criticism. At this time, CSR was primarily about companies developing a case for enhancement that could support the three Ps: positive social and environmental impact or people and planet, while at the same time benefiting the bottom line or profit. For a business strategy competing on price, CSR could be leveraged to drive resource efficiencies, installing long-lasting LED light bulbs, or reducing waste to slim down the cost of production. If the business strategy was focused on competing in a premium market, brands might buy from more sustainable, certified producers and suppliers to provide higher quality products and services. It was also used as a defensive measure to reduce the cost of complying with government regulation. For many businesses, getting ahead of the regulatory curve was one way of spreading the cost of operational investment or in legal worker standards and benefits cleaner factories, and any penalties incurred from falling behind. Either way, Cs are needed to support a business case, and the business case needed to support competitiveness, differentiation, and profitability. In turn, CSR teams could produce positive stories that might build on a long-term positive reputation of the company. However, the debate has continued to revolve around how far CSR needs to go, and the degree or share of responsibility each actor in society needs to take. The debate developed significantly in 1987 when the term sustainable development was taking shape with the themes of the United Nations advocating for a more long-term and holistic approach to safeguard the planet and our common future. For the first time, the global consensus touched on all the interconnected issues relating to society and the environment, from protecting ocean health to gender equality and equitable economic development for all citizens. It was agreed that global development, driven predominantly by the private sector, needed to be managed carefully in order to ensure everyone living today and future generations had access to the benefits of economic growth. As the consequences of human activity on the environment and the climate have continued to come, discussion about the pressures that face businesses have shifted from being primarily about reputation management to being more fundamental to the business model. Is existential even. As many scientific studies have revealed, the ecosystems or services that sustain all economic activity are now reaching breaking point and will soon be unable to replenish and sustain today's fast-paced way of operating. It began to seem realistic that CSR may not optional but critical to the long-term survival of the private sector. So where are we now? COVID-19 is forcing some specific aspect of the broader corporate responsibility discussion. This includes business resilience, social security, social equality, and the question of the externalized environmental costs created by business, ocean pollution, for instance. The good and the bad consequences of business activity have been highlighted in a new ways. Supermarket workers have become heroes, while those affected by industrial pollution are seeing their health improve from the shutdown of industrial activity. It seems that we have reached the moment where CSR no longer seems optional. For established corporation, long-term survival in a changing environmental becomes a business case in itself. Achieving long-term survival will require doing things in a way that brings about the most benefit to as many as possible, while reducing exposure to climate risks. Roadmaps will need to be put in place to secure organizational transformations towards achieving sustainable levels of operating, including net zero emissions, sustainable modes of production, zero waste, and greater stakeholders' participation. As the world went into shutdown, global growth contracted. Everywhere the GDP pipe shrunk. Overnight, the traditional demarcations of responsibility, business being responsible for providing products and services, governments responsible for healthcare, we are all blurred. It didn't matter what had been expected before or who was to blame for events. It was collectively understood that, as the members of a species undergoing a crisis, everyone had to respond however they could. Businesses and communities pulled out the stops to supply additional kit for hospitals. Blue-collar workers become key, putting their lives on the line to provide food and transportation for doctors and nurses. The traditional demarcations of responsibility were thrown up in the air. We are all reconnected with those most fundamentals of human values: resourcefulness, creativity, and compassion. We remember that values are all that are left when economic systems shut down and business cases become redundant. COVID-19 will place even greater emphasis on the role of bodies with the capital, resource, talent, and influence to invest in sustainable development, which aims to protect society against future shocks to the system. That would be all. Thank you.